And it's Wednesday night, 8 o'clock, and it's time for the pastor's chat. So I usually kind of come on, usually around this time, usually on Wednesday nights, and we just kind of talk a bit. This is an attempt to kind of connect with the parishioners, people who watch this. Some people watch it live, people watch it later. It's just a way to kind of speak out to you. I remember it goes back to the dark days, times of COVID, and just wanted to try to find an avenue to reach out to parishioners. And we've kind of kept it going. People watch it more later, I think, than live now, but that's fine. It's just a way to reach out and to speak to my parishioners and people who are listening. People like Jeff, who's coming from Vernon, BC. So it always kind of surprises me that we have people that spread out, I think, from one coast to the other in this little kind of outreach that I do. But anyway, God bless you all. So what we're going to talk about tonight, busy day. I'm going to just talk a bit about something I was sharing, a kind of extension from my homily on the weekend. I've been reading this book I've been talking about the last couple of weeks, and the book is To Sanctify the World by George Weibel. And it's kind of again, a reflection on Vatican II, 60 years out. Was it a good council, bad council? What was the sort of sense of it, and basically his arguments are quite good, actually. Just he puts it into a context. You got to always remember where the bishops were coming from, that it wasn't necessary, and I think he makes that argument quite well. And it's going to take a while. I think councils take about 100 years to really fully implement, and so we're still in the early stages. It doesn't seem like that 60 years later. It seems a little almost avant-garde past, but now I think it's maybe coming to its own. This notion of moving from a more structured or institutional church to one that's more personal. And I used the word on the weekend, Christocentric humanism, which got picked up on today actually at a diocesan meeting that we're doing. So it's Christocentric, simply Christ being the center of us, of our lives, making Christ personal, and having had that personal conversion of Christ and to be a witness in the world. And what I was keying on the weekend was the notion of Lumigencia, which was one of the documents from the council, which was light of the world, light of the Gentiles, light of the nations, kind of thing. So it's good. Yeah, it's kind of neat. So what's going on today? Well, today was a diocesan gathering. And we've done these. We have about 4 a year that we have in the diocese. A number of the priests and then those that are working in parishes get together. And in the past, it's been more information. We've been trying to change them just a bit to a little bit more of what might be called a vision statement, where we start talking in terms of, where the diocese is positioning itself going forward. Like as we come out of COVID, as we start to move deeper into the third millennia of Christendom. There's this amazing date that's coming up in another 10 years. It'll be 2033, which is 2,000 years of salvation. And that's just a nice, just always nice to have like a 10-year kind of vision with a 5-year plan. How to get there. So that's what we're kind of talking about. And I was talking about change management or change awareness. And we're using the book or the story of Exodus. So people leaving Egypt, the Jewish people coming out of Egypt into the promised land. And the point I was making was simply that convincing people we have to leave isn't that hard, because you're slaves, you're being poorly treated. It's an abysmal life, and it's not even like a bad job. I mean, you never retire, you never get a day off, you just work until you die, and it's pretty miserable. So convincing people that you had to leave Egypt wasn't hard. Promised land's even easier, because it's just a promise, right? You're just putting something out there, milk and honey, lovely stuff, going to be great, we're all going to be free, it's going to be better. Okay, that's easy. So you can't stay here, but this is going to be better, right? So that's typical of most change is trying to get people from one place to another. The hard part comes about 5 days into the desert, and that's where you run out of water. There's not enough food. The cattle are dying. Like the wife's looking at you like, this is not what we signed up for. So it sounds almost funny, but you think of it, as you're leaving Egypt, you're getting into the desert, and you start to ask yourself, maybe we could go back and make a deal with the Egyptians. it's a lot harder to change culture and to change thinking and to have new ideas than people think. And so stick with the plan. I mean, that's the thing. You can't really make a deal. Going back to Egypt isn't much of an option. You got to forge forward, and that's really hard. So that's step one. It's a lot harder than it looks, and the temptation to go back to do things the way it used to be done, or even like before COVID. Like there are things that were good in parish life, but do we really want to go back to a church that was in decline? Like we have this opportunity now as we come out of COVID to really embrace a new kind of approach and kind of just clean house a little bit in a healthy way, not kicking people out or things. It's not so much about that. It's really just about just having a look around. Say, do we need this? Do we need that? Can we clean the house? Can we make things better? That's one. The second part of the Exodus story is when we cross the Red Sea. Now, Cecil Mills and the great, Ten Commandments, and there's a huge epic movie and how they filmed all that, and the great walls of water and people walk. I don't know. I have no idea what it was actually like. But there's a sense of commitment in that. Once we crossed over, there is no going back. No one will say, okay, we are on the other side of the sea. We cannot go back. And I think that's the commitment that has to be made, from maintenance to mission, from kind of this sort of inside baseball we talk about sometimes, where the church is self-referential, like it just kind of feeds into itself, that we are indeed called to be a witness and a sign of hope for the world. And whether the world kind of gets us or not, it's not the point. The point is to do the witness and to be out there for other people, to serve them, to inspire, to admonish if necessary, but to do it in charity and love. So they know they are Christians by their love, right? So that's the thing. So, okay, hardest part of change is not leaving, because that's easy. This is bad. And it's not going. That's promise, right? We haven't got there yet. It's 5 days into the desert when things start getting hard. Every time we have a vision, often it's difficult, those first bits as we try it. Once we make a full commitment, we make a full commitment. That's it. Like once you're on the other side of the sea, you're on the other side of the sea. The hard part in the whole dialogue as I was giving it was, then what happens? Well, they go to Mount Zion, they get the Ten Commandments. There's a bit of a kerfuffle over that. They spend 40 years wandering in the desert. And that kind of feels, I don't know about everybody else, but it feels almost like we've been wandering a bit here, partly through COVID, partly through just, what is the role of the church? Where do we stand in society? Kind of the ending of Christendom, trying to figure out how do we interact with secular governments, secular situations. It just seems we're increasingly marginalized. Those are all big questions, right? I don't have answers to all that. But so 40 years in the desert as we wander, and a lot of what came out of Egypt isn't going to make it. We're going to have to make some decisions about what we carry with us into the promised land. And it's going to be painful. I don't say that like a celebratory, yay, we get to jettison all of our history. No, and first of all, it's not the point. We have to maintain that deep root with the Catholicism that got us here. But we may not have 120 parishes in the diocese. We may not have the luxury of some of the relationships we have with schools and with hospitals, with nursing homes, with the orphanages, all the things that we kind of in the Catholic Christendom, we used to have all that stuff. And I think it's not all of it's going to make it through Egypt, all the way through the desert. So that's it's a kind of a painful, almost like a bit of a letting go. But that's ultimately the goal. And there was an interesting point that was made that one of the other priests came up with. Moses never makes it to the promised land. He stops right at the Jordan, right? He's within sight, and that's his job. He got the people there. And he dies. He dies just before he enters into the promised land, as all that generation did. That's the same place where Jesus is baptized and begins his public ministry, literally. It's the same part of the Jordan. It's in the southern part near Jericho. It's not up north. There's a place up north where if you go to a trip, they take you there, and it's like, you renew your baptismal promises, and it's got a nice little spa kind of thing, and it's okay. Nothing wrong with that. You're in the River Jordan. You can do this, but the actual site is much further south, and it is near Jericho, and it's the same place. So something like Moses got us there, and then Jesus brings us across, and this is symbolic, but it's kind of important. So that's the thing, right? So put those three things together. Change is harder than it looks. Once you commit, you got to commit. Like, to move to a missional kind of outward focused church it's a commitment, and it's hard, and it's not what we're used to, and it's difficult, and it does cause a bit of angst and for everyone, I think, but nonetheless is necessary, and that not everything's going to make it, and we have to acknowledge that. This is going to be a leaner, maybe more vibrant, but a remnant church, and that's where it's heading. So there it is. Now, I was going to connect that a little bit with what I was just going on about this book I was reading. I mentioned it on Second Vatican Council. And he makes a point at the end I thought that was really, really interesting. So again, George Weevil, that there's sort of two fundamental camps with how they see Vatican II. And one splits one way and one kind of splits another. And if you see Vatican II as almost like a rupture, like that it just broke all tradition, like it just almost sever the root and we reinvent the church, then you see that's almost like when you're leaving Egypt. It's like you can say, okay, we can go anywhere we want. Like, it's the Southern Riviera. That's a nice place. Let's go down to Ethiopia for a while. Let's just hang out in Africa. It's the covenant. See, they'd gotten down into Egypt because they relied on their own providence in a way. They had famine in the promised land where they're supposed to be, and they kind of wandered down to Egypt because the food was better, and they end up getting enslaved. So it's kind of a restoration of the covenant. It wasn't like they were free to go anywhere. So it wasn't a breaking of the covenant. It was a restoration and going back to where they really should have stayed in the first place. So you see, if you have that severance with what you believe the covenant to be, I think one of two things happen. Either you go drifting off wherever you think you want, and that's not really it either. It was going up here to the promised land, or the temptation to go back to Egypt and to say, let's just put it back the way it was, because that was good, it was better, we'll just do what we used to do. And that's, I think, if you think that things are broken. The other way to read it, and this is where I think John Paul II and Benedict the 16th, who were young theologians at the council, had the sense that the church could develop without losing its roots. And that's a trick to hold that in your head, because, boy, it sure felt like we severed everything, or the culture changed so quickly, or there has been a decline. There's really no question about that. But they really believed it. And they give you the keys to kind of understanding how the council is supposed to be. And you go back to this word that I used earlier, this Christocentric humanism, that they thought that if we could maintain our tradition and yet kind of imbue that with a spirituality which is based on the risen Christ, like a personal kind of encounter with Christ and a personal relationship with the living God, the two together would be the way forward. And probably the key to understand all that really is the new catechism that they came out with. It was in the early 90s. It was just before I was ordained, actually. I remember seeing it for the first time. We were at a conference in Steubenville, and I think they weren't selling them in Canada yet. So I think it was the American version. They didn't want to sell them to us because we were Canadians. It's kind of funny, actually. But now, the catechism has that balance where when you read the new catechism, which it's not so new anymore, but it maintains that tradition. But it's not just saying, do this. It's almost like rules without relationship. No, you're supposed to be in relationship with God, have a feeling for Christ and who he is, like a sense of him, a part of him in your life. And from there, we then can understand why Christ would ask us certain things that might seem really hard and to the secular world kind of crazy. But for us, it's part of being in covenant, in relationship with God, in a true sense of that. So do you see that? So one is a severing with the traditions, and that's what got in trouble. Either kind of a go wherever you want, or entrenching back to the way it was. But if you could really believe that the church can grow and develop without losing its deeper root, then I think we're onto the right thing. And these ideas are not easy. This is not like simple stuff. But if you can kind of work that through in your head, I really think it can help. So, Maureen, I'm not sure now. You're saying that you lost you a few times, or try again? Are you going to listen to me again, or you just the sound is skipping? So I'm not really sure, but I'll try to say it one more time. Good evening there. Ali's in there. And sorry, Alain, you came in earlier. Want faith, I want to walk on water. Yeah, Alan, you walk pretty close to the water. I think it's been cold enough you could walk on water. Chosen. Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah, The Chosen. I just watched The Chosen as well, and last weekend, and they're walking on water. But does that make sense? So, again, I'm going to do this one last time because I think there's a question on the table, and I'll try to, Maureen, if you can follow this with me. So, the keys to understanding the reaction kind of to Vatican II is to see it as if people who thought it was a complete break with our tradition then felt either free to do kind of whatever they want, and that's not good. That was never what the council intended, that it could just be a free-for-all and we just reinvent the Catholic Church in sort of modern terms, almost rather than Christocentric humanism. It's like a secular humanism, and that's not what the council intended. And if you saw it as a break and a violation, then you might be tempted just to go back and say, well, look, it was pretty good back in the 50s. Why don't we just go back to the way it was? Now, that's very simplistic, but that's sort of two temptations, which are very real. I mean, that's just very human nature. Like, you see the decline, you see sort of a lack of reverence, and you want to protect what you feel dear and you love, and I get that. But what the council really wanted to do was to say, maintain the root of our faith, but let it grow. Let it develop. Let it continue on. We live in a world now in which I can talk into a microphone with a computer and people can hear me. Like, this used to need a radio or a television studio to do this. So we live in a very different world. We live in a world with nuclear power and nuclear weapons. We live in a world where global economics can affect people in ways we couldn't imagine before. We live in a world where there is global change, which is rapid, and we don't know what's going to happen with that. But the climate could be on a collision course with our ability to survive on the planet. So there's big things going on. Can the church develop with that? Is Christ still with us? Does he still have a message that's relevant and important? And I'd like to think he does. I believe Christ is who he says he is. He does the things he says he can do. And I think he can get us through these times. So there you go. Other than that, it's been a long day and I'm a little tired. So I'm going to leave it out there with that. If you're not sure, listen to it again, and maybe it'll make more sense the next time. If not, let it go. Let it go, and just spend a little time in prayer and believe that the good Lord is going to be able to get his message across. He will speak to us. He will minister to us. All is possible. So, my good friends, God bless you. May the saints and angels intercede for you. May our Blessed Mother wrap you in the mantle of her peace. May God bless you and keep you now in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless. Good night.